Section 1. The Town That Breeds Questions. Welcome to Quahog. There is something deeply strange about Quahog, Rhode Island. And I don't mean strange in the way that all fictional towns are strange, with their convenient plot lines and convenient geography. Quahog is strange in a way that goes deeper than that. It's a town where people die and come back, where memories reset, where years pass and nothing quite ages the way it should, where a talking dog and an infant supervillain live alongside ordinary human neighbors who mostly pretend none of it is unusual. Quahog operates on its own logic, its own internal physics, and once you settle into that, once you let your shoulders drop and your eyes go soft, you start to notice that the town is absolutely filled with questions that never got answered. And that's exactly what we're going to do tonight, or this morning, or whatever hour it happens to be wherever you are right now. We're going to walk through Quahog slowly, quietly, and examine every unresolved thread, every dangling mystery, every piece of lore that got introduced and then quietly abandoned or never explained in the first place. This is not a list of complaints. This is an appreciation. Because the mysteries of Family Guy are part of what makes it interesting. They're the loose threads in the fabric of a show that ran for over 2 decades and accumulated more unexplained mythology than most shows that actually tried to have mythology. So, get comfortable. If you're in bed, let the pillow settle around you. If you've got the lights off, let the darkness be gentle. If you're somewhere else entirely, just let yourself arrive here for a little while. There's nothing urgent. There's nothing that needs doing. There's just the fog coming in off the water in Quahog, and the distant sound of Peter Griffin saying something ridiculous, and the low amber glow of the drunken clam spilling out onto the sidewalk. We're going to wander through all of it. Let's start with the town itself, because Quahog, Rhode Island, is a fictional place built on a very specific, real foundation, and the show's relationship with that foundation is its first great mystery. The show is set in Rhode Island. Seth MacFarlane, who created Family Guy, attended the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. So there's a genuine personal geography baked into the world of the show. Quahog is positioned as a suburb somewhere in the state, and the creators made specific decisions about things like street names, local landmarks, and cultural references that root it in a real sense of New England place. The Quahog that exists in the show has a harbor, a coastline, a downtown area with recognizable businesses, and the kind of dense residential neighborhoods that you find in actual Rhode Island communities. But Quahog has never been given a precise location. The show has dropped hints over the years. There are references to it being near Providence. There's an episode where characters drive toward Boston and the distance feels plausible. There's another where a road trip begins from Quahog and the geography around it suggests something like the southern part of the state. But the writers have never committed to a pin on the map, and that deliberate vagueness is interesting. So it means Quahog exists in a kind of quantum state, real enough to feel grounded but undefined enough to expand or contract as the story needs. The population of Quahog is never established either. It feels like a small city or a large town, the kind of place where you could theoretically run into the same people regularly, which supports the show's logic of having the Griffins encounter the same neighbors and local characters over and over. But then an episode will suggest that Quahog has a full professional sports franchise, or a major airport, or a downtown skyline, and the scale shifts dramatically. The town seems to be whatever size the story needs it to be in any given week. That's not a criticism. It's actually one of the things that makes animated comedy work so well. But it does mean that Quahog as a place is fundamentally mysterious. You can live there for years and never quite understand its geography. The Griffin house itself has a similar quality. The address is 31 Spooner Street, and the house is a recognizable 2-story colonial-style home with a brown exterior and a detached garage. The interior layout has remained mostly consistent over the years, and fans have done detailed architectural analyses of the floor plan based on every room shown in the show. But there are inconsistencies. Rooms appear and disappear. The basement seems to be much larger in some episodes than in others. Stewie's room contains equipment that, by any reasonable estimate, would require a warehouse to house, and yet it fits somehow in what should be a standard child's bedroom in a suburban house. The neighborhood is equally elastic. The show has established that the Swansons live next door to the Griffins on one side, and for many seasons the house on the other side has had various neighbors move in and out. The Quagmires live somewhere nearby. Cleveland's house was on Spooner Street before he left for the Cleveland Show spinoff. The proximity of all these characters to each other is convenient, obviously, because it makes the logistics of getting them together easy. But it also raises questions about the economics of the neighborhood. These characters have very different income levels. Peter has worked at a brewery for most of the show's run. Joe is a police officer. Quagmire is an airline pilot. And yet they all seem to live in comparably sized houses in what appears to be the same middle-class neighborhood, which in any real New England city would be difficult to explain. The economy of Quahog is one of its softer mysteries. Peter has lost his job multiple times over the course of the show, and yet the family always seems to maintain the same lifestyle. Lois gives piano lessons occasionally, but that's never established as a significant income source. The show is not interested in financial realism, of course, but the elasticity of the family's financial situation does hint at the broader unreality of the Quahog economy. Things cost whatever they need to cost for the plot. People afford whatever they need to afford. The town's resources expand and contract to fit the story. This might all seem like ordinary animated show logic, and in most cases it is. But in Family Guy specifically, these inconsistencies matter a little more because the show has spent so much time building out its world. There are dozens of recurring locations. There are established rules about how things work. There is an internal history that the show refers back to regularly. The more detail a fictional world accumulates, the more its inconsistencies become interesting rather than forgivable. Every question about Quahog, everything that doesn't quite add up, is a thread you can pull on. And tonight, we're going to pull on quite a few of them. One of the most persistent background mysteries of the show is the nature of time in Quahog. The show has been running since 1999. The Griffin children have not aged appropriately. Meg, who is established as being around 16 years old in the earliest seasons, she should be approaching her mid-30s by now if the show operated on real time. Instead, she remains permanently in her mid to late teens. Chris is still in high school. Stewie is still 1 year old, which is the most extreme version of this phenomenon, because Stewie regularly demonstrates awareness of the passage of time and in some episodes explicitly references things that happened years ago, and yet he remains developmentally and physically an infant. The show has acknowledged this occasionally in self-aware ways, with characters making jokes about never aging or referencing the impossibility of their own timeline. But it has never given a diegetic explanation for it. The world of Quahog is not aging the way the real world ages. Something about the town, or perhaps about the Griffin family specifically, holds everything in a kind of suspension. People grow, people change in terms of personality and experience, but the physical calendar of their lives has been uncoupled from the calendar of the real world. That's a fascinating quality for a fictional setting to have, and it's one that the show has never examined directly. Why doesn't Quahog age? What is keeping it in this strange loop? Is there something about the town itself that resists the passage of time? These are questions without answers, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, there's something soothing about questions that don't have answers. They don't require resolution. They just exist as interesting places to let your mind rest for a moment. The mystery of Quahog's temporality is one of those comfortable mysteries, and the kind you can sit with in the dark and turn over slowly without any need to arrive at a conclusion. All right, that's Quahog. That's the stage. Now let's meet the players, starting with one of the most enduringly mysterious characters in the entire show. A character who appeared for the first time in Season 2, who has returned dozens of times across the series, and whose entire existence raises questions that the show has never once tried to answer. If you're enjoying the walk through Quahog so far, drop a comment below and tell me what time it is, where you are, and what you're up to. I genuinely love knowing, and if you're new here, subscribing is completely free, and it means the world to the channel. Now let's keep going. Section 2. The Giant Chicken, the Feud Without a Beginning. His name is Ernie the Giant Chicken. That he is roughly the same height as Peter Griffin, which puts him somewhere around 5 feet and 11 inches tall. He wears human clothes. He speaks, though usually only briefly. He has a wife named Nicole. He has a job, or at least he has had jobs in various episodes. He pays his bills. He shops at stores. He is, by every observable metric, a functioning member of Quahog society who happens to be an enormous anthropomorphic chicken. And he has, on multiple occasions, engaged Peter Griffin in fights of such catastrophic, city-destroying, physics-defying violence that the two of them have fallen off buildings, crashed through parking structures, driven cars into each other at full speed, fallen from airplanes, survived explosions, and caused millions of dollars of damage to Quahog infrastructure, and all without either of them dying permanently or even suffering any lasting injury. The giant chicken is one of the great unsolved mysteries of Family Guy, not because his existence is unexplained exactly, but because his vendetta with Peter is one of the most fascinating, unresolved narrative threads in the show's entire history. Let's unpack it slowly. The first chicken fight happens in Season 2, in the episode called Da Boom. This is actually a post-apocalyptic episode set after Y2K destroys civilization. And in the midst of all that chaos, Peter runs into the giant chicken, who gives him a coupon. Peter refuses the coupon, the chicken takes offense, and the two of them begin a fight that destroys several blocks of the post-apocalyptic ruins around them. The fight ends with Peter apparently killing the chicken, and then the episode moves on. That's the entire setup. A coupon. Peter refused a coupon from a giant chicken, and the chicken objected so strongly that a full brawl ensued. There's no further explanation given. The show simply presents this as a thing that happened, includes the epic fight sequence, and continues. At this point, it might have been intended as a one-time joke. The giant chicken fight as a concept, this extended operatic piece of animated violence that interrupts the actual episode and just keeps going, was such a successful comedic set piece that it clearly resonated with audiences. It was absurd, it was escalating, and it was so committed to its own internal logic that it worked beautifully as a piece of pure comedy. But then the chicken came back in Season 4. In an episode called Brian the Bachelor, Peter runs into the chicken again. And they fight again. Another enormous, sprawling battle that takes them through a hotel, off a roof, into traffic, through a shopping mall. The fight ends once more with Peter apparently victorious. The chicken falls. Peter walks away. And the show moves on, again without explanation. This established a pattern. The giant chicken would reappear periodically across the show's run, always unexpectedly, always triggering another extended fight sequence, and the fight would always end ambiguously enough to allow another return. The chicken has appeared in at least 7 major fight sequences over the course of the show, and each one has been a significant production effort. These are some of the most elaborate pieces of animation the show has ever produced, with intricate choreography, multiple environments, and a genuine cinematic quality that sets them apart from the rest of the episode. The creators clearly love doing these sequences. They have invested enormous creative energy into them. And yet the fundamental question has never been answered. Why does the giant chicken hate Peter Griffin? The coupon explanation, thin as it is, only covers the very first encounter. Why does the chicken keep coming back? If Peter defeated you in a catastrophic fight once, most rational beings would either seek revenge or avoid the person entirely. The chicken does neither. He seems to live his ordinary chicken life in Quahog, going to his job, spending time with his wife Nicole, doing whatever giant anthropomorphic chickens do in their off hours. And then at random intervals he encounters Peter, and they destroy several city blocks together. There's a genuinely interesting philosophical dimension to this. The chicken and Peter don't seem to be in a continuous state of conflict. They're not hunting each other. They're not planning their next encounter. The violence erupts suddenly, with almost no warning, and then it ends and both of them apparently return to their normal lives. This suggests that the feud exists in a kind of suspended state between encounters, a dormant conflict that activates the moment they're in proximity, like some kind of biological response that neither of them fully controls. One episode did try to offer something closer to a resolution. In Season 8, but in the episode The Chicken Ripple, Peter and the chicken actually have a moment where they seem to reach a truce. There's a brief exchange of civility. There's a suggestion that maybe the feud doesn't have to continue. And then, of course, something minor goes wrong and they're back at it. The show seems to deliberately resist any genuine reconciliation because the running joke requires the conflict to remain unresolved. But here's what makes the chicken genuinely mysterious, rather than just funny. His personal life has been elaborated on in ways that make him uncomfortably real. Nicole, his wife, has appeared in multiple episodes. She's a normal-seeming person who happens to be married to a giant chicken. She clearly has a life outside of her husband's periodic brawls with Peter Griffin. In one episode, Peter discovers that Nicole is having some kind of difficulty, and he tries to help her, which creates a moment of genuine warmth between him and the chicken's family that exists entirely outside their violent dynamic. The chicken has also been shown to have genuine remorse in some episodes. He's been shown to be capable of kindness. He seems like, in the context of his own life, a reasonably decent individual who happens to be locked into this ancient, inexplicable feud with a man he gave a coupon to once. The tragedy of the giant chicken is that he appears to be a full person trapped in a role he can't escape. Every time he encounters Peter, the feud takes over, regardless of whatever else is going on in his life. He's not a cartoon villain, he's something stranger and sadder than that. But he's a character whose entire purpose has been reduced to one relationship, one cycle of violence, and the show has never examined what that means for him. Who is the giant chicken, really? Where did he come from? How did a giant sentient chicken come to exist in Quahog, Rhode Island? Why does he dress in human clothes and hold what appear to be human jobs? Is he the only one of his kind, or are there others? These questions have never been addressed. The show presents him as simply a fact of the world. There is a giant chicken. He and Peter fight. That's all we need to know. And yet the more you think about it, the more intriguing his existence becomes. In a show that has offered at least partial explanations for most of its unusual elements, including why Brian can talk, why Stewie has the intellect he has, why the family dog and the infant can interact with the adult world, the giant chicken stands out as something that was never explained at all. He just is. And his feud with Peter just is. And the show seems to relish that inexplicability. The production detail that goes into the chicken fight sequences is worth dwelling on for a moment, because it speaks to how seriously the creative team takes this unresolved thread. These are not filler sequences. They are some of the most technically accomplished pieces of animation the show has ever produced. The environments are detailed and specific. The choreography is intricate. The violence escalates in ways that are genuinely creative and surprising. Someone, many times over across the show's history, sat down and storyboarded these sequences with care and craftsmanship. That investment suggests that the giant chicken matters to the people who make Family Guy in a way that goes beyond his function as a recurring joke. He represents something about the show's willingness to commit to absurdity. Every time the chicken appears and the fight begins, Family Guy is making a statement that it will follow a premise to its conclusion regardless of how long that takes or how disruptive it is to the normal flow of the episode. The chicken fights can go on for 3 or 4 minutes in an episode that's only 22 minutes long. They consume a significant portion of the runtime. And the show does this anyway, every time, without apology. There's something wonderful about that, and something a little melancholy, too. Because the chicken and Peter are locked in a loop. They always have been, and it seems, they always will be. The feud doesn't end because the show needs it to continue. And so Ernie the giant chicken keeps coming back, keeps fighting, keeps surviving, and the question of why is never answered, and somehow becomes richer for remaining unanswered. Let his story settle for a moment. The big chicken in the human clothes, going home to Nicole after another catastrophic brawl, wondering perhaps why things are always this way, never knowing that there's no resolution coming, because resolution was never the point. Section 3. The Mystery of Brian Griffin. The Dog Who Came From Nowhere. Brian Griffin is one of the most analyzed characters in all of animated television. He's a talking dog who walks on 2 legs, drinks martinis, drives a car, writes prose that nobody publishes, loves jazz, is openly atheist, and has complicated feelings about a woman who is married to his best friend. He is, in the early seasons of the show, one of the most fully realized characters in American animation. Smart, dry, emotionally layered, genuinely warm underneath a surface of sophisticated detachment. And almost everything about his backstory is deeply, profoundly mysterious. Let's start with the most fundamental question. Brian is a dog. He is presented as a member of the Griffin family in every functional sense. He lives in the house. He eats at the table occasionally. He has his own room. He has his own money, somehow, though the mechanics of how he earns it have never been fully explained. He can open doors, use appliances, operate vehicles, and engage with the human world without apparent difficulty. He was toilet trained at some point, presumably, although this too is never addressed. But Brian is also definitively a dog. He has biological dog characteristics that appear on a case-by-case basis when the show finds it funny. He chases tennis balls in some episodes. He goes to the veterinarian. He has fleas occasionally. He ages on a dog's timeline rather than a human's, which is an entire source of existential dread that the show has touched on and then backed away from multiple times. The question of how Brian came to be this way, how there exists a dog who is also essentially a person, has been addressed partially in the show's lore. We know that Brian was found by Peter Griffin as a puppy on the streets. This is established in a flashback episode and confirmed in other episodes that reference Brian's arrival with the family. Peter brought Brian home and the family adopted him. Now, at some point during that early period, it became clear that Brian could talk. The show has never explained why or how Brian developed human cognitive abilities and language. He just has them. He was always this way, apparently. There is a genuine backstory for Brian that was built out over the first several seasons. He grew up in a poor household before being adopted by the Griffins. His mother, a dog named Biscuit, is mentioned in several episodes in ways that carry real emotional weight. In one of the show's more devastating moments, it's revealed that after Brian left home, his mother was put down and taxidermied, and that the taxidermied version of her was displayed in the house where he grew up. Brian encounters this at some point, and the reaction he has is one of the most genuinely raw moments in the show's early years. It's a moment of real grief, the kind that makes you remember why the character worked so well when the writers were paying attention. Brian has a son. This is perhaps the single most underexplored element of his entire character. Dylan Flanagan is Brian's biological son, with a woman named Tracy Flanagan, whom Brian was apparently in a relationship with at some point before the show's timeline. Dylan appears in a Season 7 episode, is established as a troubled teenager who hasn't had a father figure, and Brian has an extended storyline about taking responsibility for him and trying to be a good dad. It's a genuinely good episode with real emotional stakes and some honest exploration of what it means to be a parent who shows up late. And then Dylan essentially disappears from the show. And he returns in a later episode, but his presence in Brian's life is not treated as an ongoing narrative. Brian, who made such a point of stepping up as a father, doesn't seem to have incorporated his son into his life in any lasting way. Dylan is one of the great abandoned threads in Family Guy's character work. The show introduced a real consequence for Brian, a real relationship with weight and history, and then set it aside. Brian's failed writing career is one of the show's most consistent running themes, and it too is wrapped in mystery. Brian has been working on a novel for most of the show's run. In the early seasons, this is played as a sympathetic character detail. He's a talented writer who can't finish his work, who struggles with self-doubt, but who has the intelligence and the desire but keeps finding reasons to avoid actually completing the thing. This is a relatable human experience rendered in an unusual character. It gave Brian genuine pathos, but the novel itself has never been described in any real detail. We don't know what it's about. We don't know what style it's written in. We see Brian working on it occasionally, sitting at his typewriter with a glass of wine nearby, making incremental progress, but the work itself is a black box. The only extended piece of Brian's prose that we ever get is from his self-help book, Wish It, Want It, Do It, which becomes a bestseller in one episode and which is universally described as shallow and terrible. The implication seems to be that Brian's true creative work, the novel he actually cares about, that is something entirely different in quality and ambition from the commercial product he accidentally produced. But we never find out what that true work actually is. Brian attended Yale, or he claims to have attended Yale. The truth of this claim is contested within the show itself. In some episodes, he references his time at Yale in ways that suggest genuine attendance. In others, characters question whether he actually went or whether he's embellishing his credentials. In one episode, it's pretty clearly implied that Brian did not graduate, if he attended at all. This ambiguity around his educational background is interesting because it mirrors something real about Brian's character. He presents himself as an intellectual, and in the early seasons, he clearly is one. He's well-read, thoughtful, articulate, but he has the insecurity of someone who's not quite sure his credentials are solid, who perhaps inflates his background slightly to maintain a sense of himself as legitimate. The Yale question has never been definitively resolved. It's one of those character details that exists in a kind of probabilistic cloud. Maybe he went. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he attended briefly and left under circumstances he prefers not to discuss. The show has left enough room in Brian's backstory to accommodate multiple versions of his history, and that's either a writing failure or a deliberate choice that reflects the way Brian operates as a character. He's a little bit constructed. He's presented himself to the world in a particular way, and not all of it may be entirely true. Brian's relationship with his own nature, his status as a dog, that is one of the most fascinating, unresolved tensions in the show. In most episodes, Brian exists comfortably in human spaces, and the fact that he's a dog is simply not remarked upon. But occasionally the show will remind you that underneath the martinis and the intellectual pretensions and the attempts at romance, he is biologically a canine, and that reminder usually comes attached to something uncomfortable. He sniffs at things instinctively. He has physical reactions to stimuli that are distinctly dog-like. He has a lifespan that is fundamentally different from the humans around him. The lifespan question is the most unresolved of all. A dog Brian's apparent age would be somewhere in the range of an older human being by canine standards. The show has referenced this in episodes that deal with mortality and the fear of death, but it is never committed to following through on the implications. Brian should, by any reasonable measure, be approaching the end of his natural life. The show can't go there because Brian is a main character, but the fact that it can't go there makes the looming mortality question even more present as a background mystery. It's something the show has raised and then carefully not examined. Then there is Brian's death in Season 12. For a few weeks of broadcast time, Brian Griffin was gone. He was killed by a car in an episode that treated his death with genuine gravity. The family mourned. Stewie was devastated in a way that felt real and earned. A new dog, Vinny, was brought into the household. And then, 2 episodes later, Stewie used time travel to undo it. Brian came back. Everything reset. The implications of this are strange. Brian died. He experienced death, presumably. He was gone for a real period of time, both in the show's internal timeline and in the real-world broadcast calendar. Then he was restored, and the show never really dealt with what that meant. Did Brian know he had died? Was he aware of the timeline where he was gone? How does a character process the experience of their own mortality being temporarily realized and then withdrawn? These questions were raised by the narrative and then gently set aside. Brian Griffin is, in the end, a character surrounded by mystery, not because the show deliberately built mystery around him, but because the show kept gesturing at depths and then looking away before plumbing them. That he's the character who might have become the most fully realized figure in the show's history if the writers had followed through on everything they set up. Instead, he's a series of interesting threads, some of them beautiful, some of them frayed, all of them pointing toward a story that was only ever partially told. Section 4. The Stewie Problem. Where did the evil genius go? There is a version of Stewie Griffin who is one of the most original characters in the history of American animation. He is 1 year old. He is dressed in a yellow shirt with red shorts. He sits in a high chair and eats pureed food that is brought to him by a mother he is actively plotting to murder. He has built a working laser cannon in his bedroom. He has a time machine. And he has constructed mind control devices and weather manipulation equipment and various other instruments of chaos, all housed in a standard suburban nursery. His voice is modeled on Rex Harrison. His worldview is that of a Bond villain. That character existed fully and brilliantly for the first 3 seasons of Family Guy. And then he began to change. And then he changed more, and then he changed more still. And the version of Stewie that exists today, while still entertaining in his own way, is so different from that original that the continuity between them feels almost like a philosophical question rather than a factual one. Are they the same character? In what sense? This is not just a question about character development, though it is that too. It's a question about identity, about what makes a character who they are, about whether the name and the appearance and the voice are sufficient to maintain continuity when everything else has been replaced. The Stewie problem is one of the most interesting mysteries in Family Guy because it doesn't have a clean answer, and the murkiness of that answer says something true about the show's approach to its own creation. Let's start with what made original Stewie so extraordinary. The premise was deceptively simple. A baby who is secretly a supervillain. The joke came from the contrast, the gap between what he looked like and what he was actually doing. He was small and physically helpless, dependent on adults for his basic survival needs, and simultaneously more intelligent than everyone around him and genuinely dangerous. His schemes were elaborate and technically sophisticated. His vocabulary was extraordinary. Now, his emotional life was complex in ways that went far beyond what you'd expect from either a baby or a traditional cartoon villain. What made Stewie work in those early seasons was the seriousness with which the show played his villainy. He wasn't winking at the audience. He wasn't performing evil. He was actually evil by the standards of his own interior life, and the show treated that evil with enough respect to make it funny. When Stewie described a plan to take over the world, the humor didn't come from how ridiculous the plan was. It came from how thoroughly committed he was to it, how methodically he'd thought it through, how genuinely untroubled he was by the moral dimensions of global subjugation. His relationship with Lois was the center of his original character. Now, the attempts to kill her were the running thread through his first 3 seasons, and what made those attempts funny, rather than disturbing, was the specificity of his grievance. Stewie's hatred of Lois wasn't random or generic. It had texture. He resented her control over his life the way any infant is controlled by their parents, but he experienced that control with the full emotional and intellectual sophistication of an adult, and the result was a kind of existential fury that expressed itself in laser beams and mind control devices. It was, at its heart, a very honest joke about the helplessness of infancy rendered in the most extreme possible terms. Another crucial element of original Stewie was that most of the other characters couldn't understand him. This was established early and maintained carefully. The adults in the show largely heard Stewie's elaborate monologues as baby babbling. His schemes went undetected because nobody could comprehend that the infant was plotting anything at all. This created a layer of dramatic irony that made every scene with him richer. The audience understood what was happening. Lois didn't. That gap was comedic gold. Brian was the exception. Brian could understand Stewie, could hold actual conversations with him, and this is how their friendship began. In the early seasons, this was used sparingly and carefully. Brian's ability to understand Stewie made him a kind of confidant, someone Stewie could speak to honestly in a world where everyone else was deaf to his actual voice. This was genuinely touching, even within the context of the villainy. Now here is the mystery. The show decided, somewhere around season 4, that the evil baby concept had been exhausted. The creators felt they'd taken the joke as far as it could go, and so they began systematically dismantling the elements that defined original Stewie. The world domination plots became less frequent. The attempts on Lois's life slowed, and then nearly stopped. The weapons and machinery appeared less often. Stewie became more emotionally accessible, more vulnerable, more interested in his relationship with Brian than in his schemes against civilization. By season 6, the 2-part episode Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie felt like a deliberate farewell to the original version of the character. In those episodes, Stewie finally does it. He kills Lois. He takes over the world. He becomes the dictator he always said he wanted to be. And then the show reveals it was all a simulation, a test scenario on his computer, and none of it actually happened. It's an emotionally complicated moment because it simultaneously gives the audience what they'd been waiting for, the completion of Stewie's original arc, and immediately withdraws it by making none of it real. The message seemed to be, here is the ending to that story. We're closing that chapter. What comes next is something different. What came next was, as noted, genuinely entertaining in its own way. The Stewie and Brian Road episodes, where the two of them go on adventures together, are some of the most beloved episodes in the show's entire run. Their chemistry is genuine. The emotional depth of their friendship, particularly in later seasons when it becomes clear just how much they mean to each other, is one of the more beautiful things the show accomplished. The Christmas episode where Stewie uses time travel to save Brian's life is, by common consent among fans, one of the most moving pieces of television the show ever produced. But the mystery is still there. Why did the evil genius disappear? The explanation given, that the creators felt the joke had run its course, doesn't fully hold up under examination. The show went on for many more seasons after retiring Evil Stewie, and in that time it found enough material for a gentler, more emotional version of the character. If there was enough story for that Stewie, why wasn't there enough story for the original? The evil genius concept is, if anything, richer and more flexible than the sensitive adventurer who replaced him. An evil baby genius could go in infinite directions. New targets, new schemes, new technologies, new allies and enemies. The villainous premise had room to grow that the show simply didn't explore. One possible answer is that the original Stewie was, in some ways, too dark for the show to maintain alongside everything else. A character who genuinely wants to murder his own mother is a difficult tonal element to manage across hundreds of episodes. As the show evolved and the family dynamic shifted, keeping Stewie's murderous intent toward Lois running in the background would have required constant, careful management. Perhaps the writers felt it was easier to retire the premise than to continue navigating it. Another possible answer is simpler and sadder. Perhaps the show just ran out of ideas for that version of the character, and rather than admitting that and working harder, they took the easier path of transformation. Making Stewie softer required less creative energy than making evil Stewie interesting in new ways. The replacement was the path of least resistance. The current version of Stewie, the emotionally complex, occasionally cross-dressing, friendship-oriented version, is not without value. He's still funny. He still has moments of genuine brilliance. But something irreplaceable was lost when the evil genius was retired. There are hundreds of animated characters who are emotionally vulnerable and searching for their identity. There was only ever one evil genius baby who built ray guns between naps. That character was singular, and his departure is the biggest unsolved mystery of Family Guy's character history. Not unsolved in the sense of unknown, but unsolved in the sense of unresolved. The show changed the character, but never quite explained, even to itself, what was truly gained and what was truly lost. Section 5, the Meg Enigma. Why does Quahog hate her? This is one of the most unsettling mysteries in Family Guy, and it's unsettling precisely because it has real-world implications that the show has only partially engaged with. Why does everyone hate Meg Griffin? Let me be precise about what I mean. In the real world, a show's treatment of a character is the result of creative decisions made by writers and producers. The mockery of Meg is, from that perspective, simply a choice the creative team made about how to use the character. That's true in its important context. But within the world of the show, the question has a different dimension. Within the world of Quahog, a Meg Griffin is subject to a level of mockery, dismissal, and outright cruelty from her own family, and from strangers that is extraordinary even by the standards of animated comedy. And the show has never fully explained why. In the first 3 seasons, Meg's role is straightforward. She's the ordinary one. In a family that includes a secretly evil infant genius, a talking dog, a chronically irresponsible father, and a mother of considerable hidden complexity, Meg is the teenager who just wants to fit in. She's unpopular at school. She doesn't have many friends. She's a bit awkward and a bit boring compared to the chaos surrounding her. This is a legitimate character premise. The comedy came from the contrast, the mundane teenager in the extraordinary family. But the show's treatment of Meg escalated over time in ways that went beyond this original premise. The jokes shifted from her being ordinary to her being ugly, from her being socially awkward to her being actively despised, from her being the least interesting member of the family to being treated as if her existence were a burden or an embarrassment. By the middle of the show's run, entire episodes were structured around the joke that Meg is repulsive and everyone wishes she would go away. The mystery, in the in-universe sense, is why Quahog has collectively decided this about her. Meg is not, by any observable metric, worse than the people around her. She is not cruel, she is not dangerous. She has various interests and modest talents. She is, in most measurable ways, a better person than her father. And yet both her family and strangers treat her with a contempt that is completely disproportionate to anything she has actually done. The show has tried on several occasions to provide something like an explanation. The most notable attempt is the episode Seahorse Seashell Party from Season 10, in which Meg has her breakdown and tells her family exactly what she thinks of them. The scene is genuinely powerful. Mila Kunis performs it with real commitment. Meg lays out, clearly and accurately, the ways in which each member of her family has failed her. It's one of the few moments in the show's later years where she is treated as a full character with a valid perspective on her own life. But then the episode does something strange. It concludes with Meg voluntarily taking back her grievances. She accepts that her role in the family is to be the one who absorbs everyone else's frustrations. Without her as a target, the episode suggests the family would turn on each other and the dynamics would collapse. So she goes back to her position as the punching bag, consciously and voluntarily, because it's what the family needs. The message is troubling if you think about it for more than a moment. But the in-universe mystery is this. Why did Meg reach this conclusion? Why did she decide that this was her role? What happened in her history that led her to believe her function was to be a receptacle for the family's displaced aggression? The episode hints at something real about family systems and the way certain members absorb dysfunction so that others don't have to. But it doesn't explain how Meg specifically came to occupy that position. The episode Peter's Sister from Season 14 tries a different kind of explanation. It reveals that Peter was physically and emotionally abused by his older sister Karen growing up. This cycle of abuse, the episode suggests, is part of why Peter treats Meg the way he does. He was damaged by being the family's weakest member, and he perpetuates that dynamic on his own daughter. This is actually a fairly sophisticated psychological observation about how abuse travels across generations. Meg learns about this history and reconciles with Peter. It's a good episode. And then the next episode, Peter is back to treating Meg the same way, because the show can't commit to change. The explanation was offered, and then the status quo returned, which means the explanation sits in a kind of limbo. It happened. It was real. But it didn't change anything. So does the explanation still explain anything? The deeper mystery of Meg is about identity. Who is Meg Griffin when the abuse is removed from the equation? The show has occasionally shown us glimpses of this. The crossover episode with The Simpsons, in which Meg befriends Lisa Simpson, and the two of them bond over being the overlooked intellectuals in their respective families, is one of the show's more thoughtful pieces of character work. Lisa tells Meg that she matters. Meg shows talent at music. There's a warmth to the episode that reveals how much the character is capable of when the writers give her room to be a person rather than a target. Meg is, in many ways, the most genuinely sympathetic character in the show. So she wants simple things: love, acknowledgement, belonging. She persists in a world that has been constructed, for reasons the show has never fully explained even to itself, to be hostile to her. She keeps going. She maintains her basic decency despite everything. That's either a remarkable resilience or a quiet tragedy, and the show has never committed to which it is. The mystery of why Quahog hates Meg is, in a sense, the most honest mystery in the show, because the real answer is that the writers decided she would be treated that way, and then over time that decision became so embedded in the show's DNA that changing it felt structurally impossible. The in-universe mystery and the creative mystery are the same mystery viewed from different angles. Both remain unresolved. Section 6. Peter Griffin's Lost Years. The man before the show. Peter Griffin is, by common agreement, one of the most recognizable characters in American animated comedy. His face is on merchandise worldwide. His voice, his laugh, his specific brand of low-information certainty about everything are immediately recognizable. He's a cultural shorthand for a certain kind of working-class American male excess. He is, in many ways, the show's most fully committed character, the one whose every quality has been pushed to its logical extreme and then beyond. But here's the thing, the Peter Griffin who exists in the middle and later seasons of Family Guy is a considerably different person from the Peter Griffin who existed at the show's beginning. And the transformation between those two versions is one of the least explained elements of the entire show. How did this relatively decent, occasionally kind, genuinely loving family man become the reckless, casually cruel, sometimes monstrous figure of the later years? Let's talk about who Peter was. In the first 3 seasons, Peter worked at the happy-go-lucky toy factory, which was owned and operated by a man named Mr. Weed. His job there was never entirely clear in terms of its specific function, but he was clearly a line worker of some kind, a man doing physical labor in a manufacturing environment. He was bad at it, usually, in the way that he was bad at most things, but he showed up. He was employed. He had colleagues and a routine. Mr. Weed is himself a minor mystery of the show, yet he appeared in multiple episodes in the early seasons as a significant significant authority figure in Peter's life, someone whose opinion Peter cared about and whose displeasure had real consequences for him. And then Mr. Weed died in an episode involving a choking incident, and the happy-go-lucky toy factory was essentially written out of the show. Peter moved on to work at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, which became his primary employment setting for most of the show's subsequent run. The toy factory years were simply left behind. But before the toy factory, before Lois, before Quahog, there was a Peter Griffin whose backstory has been assembled in fragments across dozens of episodes. And that backstory contains several significant mysteries. Peter's father is one of them. The question of who Peter's biological father is was introduced as a genuine narrative thread and then handled in ways that left more questions than answers. Peter grew up believing that Francis Griffin, the stern Irish Catholic man who appears in various episodes of the show, was his biological father. The relationship between Peter and Francis is one of the show's more emotionally complex dynamics. Francis was strict, often cold, and represented a kind of Catholic moral authority that Peter both resisted and craved. His death in the show was one of the more genuinely affecting moments of the middle seasons. But in a later episode, it's revealed that Francis was not Peter's biological father. His actual biological father is a man named Mickey McFinnigan, an Irish traveler or wanderer who had a brief relationship with Peter's mother. Peter tracks him down, they have a complicated encounter, and Peter comes away from it with some new understanding of himself. But the implications of this revelation were never fully developed. Who was Mickey McFinnigan? What was the nature of his relationship with Peter's mother? Does this change how we understand Peter's character, his recklessness, his inability to commit, his various obvious qualities? The show introduced this as a significant plot development, and then didn't do much with it afterward. The revelation sits in the show's lore, available to be referenced, but its significance was never explored. Peter has a whole other parentage that he knows about now, a whole other branch of his family history, and this is treated as a resolved plot point, when really it's an opening rather than a closing. Peter's childhood friend Mike Pulaski is another minor mystery. He appears in flashback sequences occasionally, a character from Peter's childhood who represents the life Peter might have led if things had gone differently. But he's used sparingly and inconsistently, a hint at a backstory that was never fully built out. The military years are perhaps the most interesting gap in Peter's personal history. The show has referenced on multiple occasions that Peter had some kind of experience with the military, or at least military-adjacent institutions, but this has never been detailed consistently. There are episodes where Peter seems to have genuine skills or knowledge that would require training of some kind. And then there are episodes where he appears completely ignorant of basic adult knowledge that any person of his age would be expected to have. This inconsistency is partly just the show not caring deeply about internal consistency, but it also means that large chunks of Peter's personal history are simply blank. The most significant mystery about Peter's past, though, is the psychological one. Where did the cruelty come from? The early Peter was capable of real love and genuine remorse. The later Peter seems to experience neither. Something happened to this person between the beginning of the show and the middle of it. Something that eroded his capacity for empathy and replaced it with a kind of blunt, childish selfishness. The show has offered the partial explanation of Francis's emotional coldness and the cycle of abuse. But this doesn't fully account for the magnitude of the transformation. People who experience emotionally cold childhoods don't all become the character Peter became. Something else happened, something the show has never named or examined. This is the mystery of Peter Griffin's lost years. Not the years before the show necessarily, but the years between who he was in Season 2 and who he became by Season 10. The transformation happened on screen, in front of the audience, episode by episode, and yet it was never acknowledged, never explained, never given context. He just slowly became a different person, and the show continued as if this were simply who he'd always been. Section 7. Quagmire's Dark Secrets. The Man Who Was Never Explained. Glenn Quagmire is one of the most discussed characters in Family Guy's history for reasons that are not entirely comfortable. He is Peter's neighbor and one of his closest friends. He is a commercial airline pilot for American Airlines. He has a house on Spooner Street. He is, from a distance, a fairly standard supporting character in a sitcom ensemble. And the more you examine him, the stranger he becomes. Quagmire's age is one of the show's most persisting mysteries, at least in the numerical sense. In one episode, it's revealed that Quagmire is 61 years old. This is played as a joke and is intended to be shocking. If taken at face value, it would mean that Quagmire looks and acts approximately 30 years younger than his actual age. His skin, his energy, his apparent physical condition, none of it is consistent with being in his 60s. The most common reading is that this was a throwaway joke that wasn't meant to be taken literally, a one-off line delivered for comedic effect that doesn't establish anything binding about the character's actual age. But it's in the show. It's canon in the sense that it was aired and never contradicted by any other statement of his age. If Quagmire is 61, then a huge number of other things about his life need to be re-examined. His military service, which has been referenced in various episodes. His apparent contemporaneity with Peter and Joe, both of whom are clearly significantly younger. His various relationships and their timelines. Quagmire has a military past that has been gestured at but never developed. And he served in some capacity before becoming an airline pilot, and some of his skills and some of his more disturbing capabilities seem to draw on that background. But the specifics of his military service are blank. When did he serve? In what branch? In what conflicts? The show has occasionally used his background to give him a moment of unexpected competence or unexpected darkness, but it has never built out the actual history. Quagmire's family is another mystery. His father is Dan Quagmire, who appears in one of the more controversial episodes of the show. Dan Quagmire is a veteran, married to a significantly younger woman, and in the episode's conclusion, it's revealed that Dan is in the process of transitioning, that she was assigned male at birth, which is treated in the episode with mixed levels of sensitivity. The episode itself is controversial for various reasons that aren't entirely relevant here, but what it establishes about Quagmire's family is interesting. He has a complex relationship with his father. His family background is unusual, and these elements, introduced in that episode, were not substantially developed afterward. Quagmire's sister Brenda appears in one episode, trapped in an abusive relationship, and the episode deals with the dynamics of that relationship in ways that were intended to be serious. Peter and Joe ultimately intervene. The episode is one of the show's attempts at genuinely difficult subject matter. But Brenda, like so many of the characters introduced in focused episodes, disappears after her storyline is resolved. Quagmire has a sister whose life the audience witnessed in Crisis, and then she's gone. The deepest mystery of Quagmire is the one the show has gestured at most directly and answered least clearly. He is, by any objective measure, not a good person in many of the ways that matter. His behavior toward women across the show's run is, to put it charitably, predatory. The show has at various points presented this behavior as comedic, as something to be mildly criticized, but ultimately accepted as part of his character, and occasionally as something darker, that it doesn't quite know how to frame. The speech Quagmire delivers about Brian in the episode Jerome is the New Black is one of the show's most discussed pieces of character writing. Quagmire tells Brian, in precise and damning terms, exactly why he despises him. The speech is notable for being entirely accurate, often cataloging Brian's actual faults with clarity and conviction. But the scene is also interesting for what it implies about Quagmire himself. He is clearly capable of moral clarity, of seeing through pretension and hypocrisy, of holding others accountable for their worst qualities. Why then does this capacity not extend to his own behavior? Quagmire can see Brian's flaws perfectly. He seems less equipped to examine his own. This is, perhaps, not a mystery so much as a human reality. The asymmetry between our clarity about others and our blindness about ourselves. But in Quagmire's case, the gap is so wide that it becomes genuinely interesting. There's a character in there who is smarter and more perceptive than he appears, who has a genuine moral sensibility that applies inconsistently. What made him this way? What happened in those military years, in that family, at whatever point in his long and mysterious history, that produced the specific contradiction he represents? The show has never told us. Quagmire remains, after all these years, a deeply mysterious person. His real age is unclear. His actual history is mostly blank. His contradictions are sharp and unexamined. He is, in many ways, the most unexplored major character in Family Guy's roster, and given how much screen time he's accumulated, that's a remarkable achievement. Section 8. Death and Survival. In Quahog, the rules nobody explained. Quahog is a town where people die and then don't stay dead. This is not a consistent supernatural rule of the show's universe. It's more like a soft guideline that applies selectively and without clear criteria. And trying to understand when death is permanent and when it isn't is one of the most entertaining and genuinely mystifying exercises you can do with the show's internal logic. Let's start with what we know. Family Guy has killed several major and minor characters over its run. Some of those deaths stuck. Some didn't. Some were reversed explicitly through narrative devices like time travel. Some were reversed implicitly, with characters simply reappearing in later episodes without explanation. And some were never reversed, with the characters simply gone from the show's world. The clearest example of death that didn't stick is Brian Griffin's, which we've already discussed. He was hit by a car in Season 12, mourned extensively, replaced temporarily, and then restored through Stewie's time travel intervention. The mechanics of this reversal were explicit. Stewie took a time travel device, went back to the moment before the car hit Brian, and prevented it. Brian's death was undone. Everyone who experienced it, with the partial exception of Stewie, had no memory of it afterward. From most of the characters' perspectives, Brian simply didn't die. The question this raises is substantial. If death can be undone by time travel, why is this mechanism not used more often? The show has established that Stewie has a time machine. It has established that Stewie cares deeply about Brian. In subsequent episodes, when characters die or near die, why doesn't Stewie simply intervene? The time travel machine exists. It's been demonstrated to work. Its use to save Brian's life was the most emotionally resonant moment in the show's later years. Now, the show doesn't answer this. The time machine appears when the plot requires it and disappears when it doesn't. This is normal for animated comedies, which don't operate on the principle of using all available resources in every situation. But it does create a logical gap. Stewie has the ability to prevent death. He's demonstrated this. Why does he not use it more broadly? Mr. Weed, Peter's original boss, died from a piece of dinner roll lodging in his throat during a company dinner. This death was played straight, with consequences. Peter lost his job. He had to find new employment. The death of Mr. Weed changed the trajectory of the show in a meaningful way. It was, by any standard, a permanent narrative death. But then there are the characters who died in episodes and then showed up again without explanation. But the show's universe includes a character named Death, the actual personification of death, voiced originally by Norm Macdonald. Death appears as a recurring character in several episodes. He is literally the spirit that collects the souls of the deceased. His existence as a character implies that death in the show's universe operates according to specific supernatural rules. Someone comes to collect you. There is a process. It's not random. And yet the process appears to be highly inconsistent. Some characters who should be dead by the show's own logic continue to appear. Some characters who appear to die in episodes return later. The presence of death as a character, rather than clarifying how mortality works in Quahog, actually makes it more confusing. If death exists and is a person, then every death is a deliberate collection. Why does he come for some characters and not others? Why can some deaths be reversed and others can't? Joe Swanson, the paraplegic police officer who is one of Peter's closest friends, has had his disability adjusted on multiple occasions. In some episodes, usually through plot mechanisms involving surgery or supernatural intervention, Joe has temporarily regained the use of his legs. These episodes always end with his disability being restored. The specific nature of his original injury has been referenced inconsistently over the years. The show gives different explanations at different points for how and when he was injured. Cleveland Brown left the show entirely to star in his own spin-off, The Cleveland Show, which aired from 2009 to 2013. During that period, Cleveland was not a regular character in Family Guy. But when The Cleveland Show ended, Cleveland returned to Family Guy, reclaiming his place in the cast. The show acknowledged his return and moved on. But the internal logic of this, how his Quahog life relates to his period in Virginia during the spin-off, has never been reconciled clearly. Death in Quahog is, in the end, a negotiable concept. It happens. It matters sometimes. It can be undone under the right circumstances. It's permanent for some characters and temporary for others. The criteria for these different outcomes are never stated. They are determined by what the show needs narratively, which is a completely legitimate creative approach, but which means that death in Quahog carries a weight that is never quite established and never quite dismissed. The ambiguity of death in the show is, in its way, one of Quahog's defining characteristics. It's a place where the normal rules don't entirely apply, where the permanent can be reversed and the temporary can become permanent, and you're never quite sure which is which until it happens. Section 9. The Road to Episodes. What is canon? What is not? The Road to Episodes are a distinct tradition within Family Guy, a series of adventure episodes that break from the show's normal format to send Brian and Stewie on journeys across history, across geography, across alternate timelines, and across dimensions. They began in Season 2 with Road to Rhode Island, in which Brian and Stewie travel across the country, trying to get home after being stranded. The episode was beloved for its character work, its musical numbers, and its willingness to take two characters out of their normal context and let them interact in new ways. What followed was a series of increasingly ambitious entries: Road to Europe, Road to Rupert, Road to Germany, Road to the Multiverse, Road to the North Pole, Road to India, Road to Vegas, and others. Each one placed Brian and Stewie in a new context and explored their relationship from a new angle. These episodes are, by common consensus among people who followed the show closely, among the best Family Guy has ever produced. But they raise a significant continuity question. The Road to Episodes frequently involve events of major consequence. In Road to the Multiverse, Brian and Stewie travel through dozens of alternate versions of the Family Guy universe, including versions where the Griffins never existed, but versions where different historical events occurred, versions where the laws of physics are different. In Road to Germany, Brian and Stewie travel back to 1939 and interact with the events of the Second World War. In Road to the North Pole, they actually meet Santa Claus and discover the disturbing reality of his operation. How much of this is canon? The show has a soft relationship with its own internal continuity in general. Events that happen in one episode are often forgotten by the next. Characters learn lessons and then unlearn them. Relationships develop and then reset. This is standard animated comedy practice, and most of the time it doesn't matter. But the Road to Episodes contain events that seem too significant to simply ignore. The multiverse travel, in particular, raises questions that the show has never addressed. If Brian and Stewie have traveled to dozens of alternate versions of their own universe, If they've seen worlds where they don't exist and worlds where history turned out differently, if they've experienced the full scope of what their reality could have been, how does this not change them fundamentally? How does Stewie walk away from witnessing alternate universes and go back to the same suburban routines as if nothing happened? The time travel episodes are even more complicated. Stewie's time machine has been used not just in the road to episodes, but in various other contexts throughout the show. It has been used to prevent Brian's death. It has been used to visit historical periods. It has been used to explore hypothetical timelines. The rules governing what the time machine can and cannot do have never been established consistently. Sometimes changes made in the past appear to affect the present. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes Stewie is aware of changes in the timeline, and sometimes he isn't. Back to the pilot, the episode where Brian and Stewie travel back to the very first episode of Family Guy, is one of the most interesting in this regard. It directly engages with the show's own history, with its own first episode, and uses that engagement as a way of examining what the show was and what it became. But it's also a time travel episode in a show where time travel has no consistent rules, which means the implications of what happens can't be calculated against any established framework. The road to episodes also contain the show's most unambiguous evidence that Stewie is genuinely the most capable person in Quahog. His engineering and scientific abilities, which are displayed most completely in these episodes, are extraordinary. He has built a functioning time machine. He has built multiverse transportation devices. He has demonstrated physics-defying capabilities on multiple occasions. And then he returns to the Griffin household and nobody notices. And the next episode he's back in his high chair eating pureed food. How does the world not know about Stewie? How has a 1-year-old who has traveled through time and across universes and who possesses weapons-grade technology in a suburban nursery never attracted significant outside attention? The show has occasionally acknowledged this paradox with jokes about government agencies who monitor Stewie's activities, but these references are never developed into anything consistent. Stewie remains officially an infant, under the official radar, in official possession of technology that would reshape human civilization. The road to canon question is, in a sense, unanswerable because the show itself hasn't decided. These episodes are real within the show's universe. They depict things that actually happen to these characters, and yet they don't accumulate into a continuous narrative in the way that real events would. They exist as memorable standalone adventures that reveal character without changing it, which is perhaps its own kind of answer. In Quahog, experience doesn't have to change you. You can travel across the multiverse and come back exactly as you were. That might be a feature rather than a bug. Section 10. The Griffin Family. Dark Secrets. What Lois hid, what Peter never knew. The Griffin family presents itself as a transparent entity. To Peter's inner life is on constant public display. His opinions, his impulses, his fears, all of them broadcast loudly and continuously. You might think you know everything about this family. But Lois Griffin carries secrets that the show has revealed in fragments across its run. And assembling those fragments reveals a woman who is considerably more complex and considerably more hidden than her surface presentation suggests. Lois's maiden name is Pewterschmidt. Her father is Carter Pewterschmidt, one of the wealthiest men in New England, a figure of old money and old values who regards Peter with barely concealed disdain. The Pewterschmidt family has money that goes back generations, money built on industries that the show has referred to variously and inconsistently. Carter's personal history is one of the show's funnier running gags. The rich patriarch who is secretly capable of extraordinary things while maintaining the veneer of old-world propriety. But the Pewterschmidt family history contains elements that are significantly darker than comedy, and these elements have been introduced and then largely abandoned. In one episode, it's revealed that Carter made his fortune partly through connections with organized crime in the mid-20th century. In another, it's suggested that the Pewterschmidt family's wealth has roots in various forms of exploitation. These revelations are played for laughs, but they carry implications about the source of the family's privilege that the show never seriously examined. Lois herself has a history that she rarely discusses openly. Her past before Peter is the most significant blank in the show's character work. She was In early episodes, described as having been more free-spirited in her youth, and the show has occasionally deployed flashback versions of young Lois who seem quite different from the composed, capable mother she became. But what actually happened to Lois before she met Peter is largely unaddressed. There are references to Lois having had a wilder youth. She was apparently somewhat rebellious against her privileged upbringing. There are hints of relationships and experiences that are gestured at but not detailed. At various points, the show implies that Lois has a secret capacity for morality that can bend under pressure. In episodes where she is placed in extraordinary circumstances, she sometimes reveals skills, inclinations, or dark impulses that don't fit the piano teaching, dinner preparing, patient wife identity she maintains in daily life. The episode Lethal Weapons, in which Lois discovers and develops a talent for martial arts, is one example of this. She becomes dangerously good at fighting, and the episode explores what happens when someone who has been controlled and patient for a long time discovers they have the capacity for controlled violence. It's a genuinely interesting character episode, and it suggests that Lois has depths that the show has rarely explored. Lois has also been shown, in multiple episodes, to have a complicated relationship with her own attractiveness, and with the way that attractiveness functions socially. She is aware that she is considered physically appealing. She has used this awareness occasionally, sometimes consciously and sometimes less so. While the show has at various points suggested that Lois's social navigation, the way she manages relationships with Peter's friends, with other parents, with authority figures, involves a level of strategic presentation that the pleasant surface doesn't fully reveal. Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt, Lois's parents, have a marriage of their own that the show has used for comedy and occasionally for something darker. Carter's personal philosophy is frequently monstrous in ways that the show treats as funny because of how cartoonish he is. But every now and then an episode will push past the cartoon and suggest that the Pewterschmidt household, where Lois grew up, was genuinely difficult in ways she hasn't fully processed. Patrick Pewterschmidt, Lois's brother, is perhaps the most significant abandoned thread in the family backstory. Patrick is Lois's brother, who has been in a psychiatric institution. His primary delusion is that he is killing fat men, a specific and disturbing obsession. The episode in which he appears is played largely for horror comedy, but the implications of his existence within the Pewterschmidt family are significant. Lois has a brother with a serious mental illness. Her family kept this hidden for years. The class dynamics involved, the wealthy family managing a dangerous secret, are never examined. What kind of household produces both Lois Griffin and her institutionalized brother? What was the Pewterschmidt family dynamic like when these two were growing up? The show hints at wealth class dysfunction, at a family that maintained appearances while significant things were hidden or suppressed, but it never builds out the specifics. But the Pewterschmidt family backstory is one of the richest abandoned mines in Family Guy's character lore. The dark secret that sits at the center of the Griffin family, though, is really about love and its conditions. In the early seasons, Peter and Lois's marriage felt real. Not perfect, not smooth, but genuinely connected. They loved each other in a way that was specific and particular to who they were. As the show progressed, that specificity eroded. The love became more conditional, more transactional, more performed. By the later seasons, their relationship looked less like two people who chose each other and more like two people who were simply positioned together by the show's format. The mystery is where that original connection went. The early Peter and Lois had a dynamic that felt hard-won, but like two people who genuinely complemented each other despite their obvious differences. Peter's simplicity and Lois's complexity met somewhere in the middle and produced something real. When did that meeting stop happening? When did the marriage become the arrangement? The show moved away from answering this question, maybe because answering it would require acknowledging how far the characters had drifted from who they originally were. The Griffin family secret, the one that the show has hidden in plain sight across its entire run, is that the family was once something genuine, and that something happened to make it something else. That transformation is the mystery at the heart of everything. Section 11. The Minor Mysteries. Cleveland's departure, Bonnie's pregnancy, and Consuela's story. Not every mystery in Quahog belongs to a major character. Some of the show's most interesting unresolved threads are attached to secondary figures, people who drift in and out of the Griffin orbit and leave questions in their wake. Cleveland Brown is one of the show's original supporting cast members. He was there from very early in the show, a gentle, soft-spoken man who was one of Peter's closest friends. His marriage to his first wife, Loretta, and the subsequent dissolution of that marriage when she had an affair with Quagmire was one of the more dramatically developed storylines of the show's middle period. It led directly to Cleveland leaving Quahog, moving back to his hometown, and receiving his own spin-off show. The spin-off ran for 4 seasons and told its own story about Cleveland building a new life. When it ended, Cleveland returned to Quahog and resumed his place among Peter's friend group as if the years away had been a brief interlude. The show acknowledged the return, but didn't deeply interrogate what those years had meant, what Cleveland had learned, how his experiences in Virginia and beyond had changed him, if they had changed him at all. There is also the strange question of Cleveland Jr. Cleveland's son, as portrayed in the Cleveland show, is a significantly different character from the younger, more energetic Cleveland Jr., who appeared in the original Family Guy episodes. The spin-off version of Cleveland Jr. is heavier, more quiet, more introspective, and this is treated within the spin-off as simply who he is. But the continuity between the two versions of the character was never explained. But were they always the same person, and the original characterization was inaccurate? Did something happen to Cleveland Jr. that changed him between his Family Guy appearances and his spin-off characterization? The show has never said. Bonnie Swanson's pregnancy is one of Family Guy's most discussed continuity mysteries. Bonnie, Joe's wife, was visibly pregnant for an extraordinary number of seasons. This was an ongoing running joke, the pregnancy that never ended, stretching across roughly 8 years of the show's in-universe time without Bonnie ever giving birth. The show treated this as funny, the implication being that Bonnie's pregnancy was effectively eternal, a permanent state rather than a developmental one. Eventually, in season 7, Bonnie did give birth. The baby, a daughter named Susie, became a recurring minor character. But the nearly decade-long pregnancy was never explained. How was Bonnie pregnant for what appears to be multiple years? Did the show intend from the beginning for this to be a joke that eventually resolved? Or did it intend the pregnancy to simply be a permanent character trait that the creators eventually felt compelled to resolve? The answer appears to be the latter, but the impossibility of the timeline was never acknowledged. Susie Swanson, once born, was given an unusual quality. She thinks in a voice that is clearly that of an adult male, with thoughts that are sophisticated and darkly funny. This is Stewie's dynamic transplanted into a new character. But unlike Stewie, whose extraordinary inner life has been given extensive narrative attention, Susie's inner monologue is used sparingly and inconsistently. She has the same essential setup as Stewie, an infant with a hidden adult interior life, but she receives none of the same development. She is in many ways a mystery by default. What is going on inside Susie Swanson? The show has the premise in place to explore this and has never chosen to. Consuela is one of the show's more distinctive recurring characters, the house cleaner who appears periodically, primarily for comic effect, whose signature characteristic is saying no and lemon pledge. She is a Latina cleaning woman, and the show's use of her has been criticized fairly by various commentators as relying on ethnic stereotyping. But there's also something interesting about Consuela as a character, because the show has occasionally given her moments that suggest a much fuller life happening off-screen. In some episodes, Consuela is shown in contexts that suggest she has a complex social world, relationships, concerns, and intelligence that the show usually ignores in favor of the simple joke. She has, in at least one episode, demonstrated a level of practical capability that made her more useful and more interesting than most of the main cast in that specific situation. But she remains, by design, a peripheral figure whose interior life and backstory are entirely blank. The recurring question these minor characters raise is about the show's universe building. Quahog is populated by dozens of figures who appear regularly enough to feel like part of the community, but who exist primarily to serve specific functions in specific scenes. They are present enough to make the town feel lived in, but defined narrowly enough that they don't require real development. This is standard television practice for secondary characters. But in Family Guy's case, the show's longevity means these characters have accumulated enough screen time to feel like they deserve more explanation than they've received. The minor mysteries of Quahog are, in aggregate, a picture of a world that is much larger than the show has ever fully explored. Every recurring character who gets a quick joke and no backstory is a door that was never opened. Every plot thread that was introduced and abandoned is a story that was started and left incomplete. This is not unusual for a show that ran for over 2 decades with hundreds of episodes and a rotating writing staff. It's simply the nature of a long-running comedy. But taken together, these minor mysteries give Quahog a quality that the show may not have entirely intended. It feels genuinely deep, genuinely unexplored, genuinely full of things that haven't been examined. A town with that quality is the best kind of town to visit in the small hours of the night, when the lights are low and the day is done and you don't need answers. Just the comfortable sense of questions gently turning. Section 12. And then there were fewer. Quahog's one true murder mystery. There is one episode in Family Guy's entire run that functions as a genuine mystery story. Not a parody of a mystery story. Not a wink at mystery conventions. Not a sketch that references Agatha Christie and moves on. But an actual sustained piece of whodunit plotting that takes its premise seriously for almost an entire hour of television. It is the Season 9 premiere, an episode called And Then There Were Fewer. And it is, by almost universal agreement, one of the best episodes the show ever produced. It is also, in its strange way, a monument to the mysteries the show left unresolved. Because even this episode, the one that actually tried to answer questions and deliver resolution, left something behind. It left a question that sits there quietly at the end, unanswered, like a loose thread that nobody noticed until you were already out the door. But let's start at the beginning, because this episode deserves a proper walkthrough. The Griffin family, along with most of the recurring residents of Quahog, receives anonymous invitations to a dinner party at a cliffside mansion. The invitations say only that the event is in their honor. Nobody knows who sent them. The town turns up anyway because this is Quahog, and mysterious invitations to remote clifftop mansions are apparently just something that happens. When they arrive, they're greeted by Consuela, the Griffin family's housekeeper in a recurring role, who leads them to the dining room. Their host is revealed to be actor James Woods, appearing in his recurring role as an exaggerated version of himself, a man who has made enemies across Quahog through various misdeeds over his many appearances in the show. Woods announces that he has become a born-again Christian. He wants to make amends. He has invited everyone he has wronged, which, based on the guest list, this is essentially the entire population of Quahog. He wants to apologize, to clear the slate, to begin his life anew with a clean conscience. And then Quagmire's date, a woman named Stephanie, is shot and killed. Not James Woods. Stephanie. The bullet was meant for Woods, set up in advance in a mechanism pointed at the head seat at the table. But Woods stepped away from the table, Stephanie sat down in his spot, and the mechanism fired at the wrong target. The plot was going to go wrong from the very first moment, and it kept going wrong, accumulating victims across the rest of the evening, until the evening ended with 4 people dead. 2 of them recurring Quahog residents the show had confirmed would not be coming back. The episode is enormously entertaining as a piece of plotting. It moves efficiently through its mystery mechanics, dropping clues, building suspicion toward multiple characters, subverting expectations in genuinely clever ways. The killer turns out to be Diane Simmons, Tom Tucker's longtime co-anchor at the Quahog 5 News. Her motive is elegant and sad. James Woods had been secretly dating her, ended their relationship when she turned 40, and Tom Tucker had simultaneously arranged to have her replaced with a younger anchor. 2 people had discarded her at the same moment of her life. She wasn't going to accept that. Her plan was specific and intelligent. She bribed a young news intern named Priscilla to seduce James Woods and convince him to become a born-again Christian. A born-again Christian would want to make amends. Making amends would require gathering everyone he'd wronged in one place. And if he was gathering everyone he'd wronged, Diane could be there. And if Diane could be there, she could arrange to have him shot and the blame fall on Tom Tucker. She had thought it through, except for Stephanie. Stephanie's death was a genuine accident in Diane's plan, and the remorse she shows in the moment. Stephanie is shot before Diane has composed herself into the grieving bystander she needs to be, is the one crack in her performance that Lois will eventually trace back to an answer. The murders accumulate. Muriel Goldman, the pharmacist's wife, a kind and ordinary woman who has been in the background of Quahog for years, is killed when she witnesses Diane tamper with evidence. Derek Wilcox, Gillian's husband, is struck with a Golden Globe Award and pushed from a balcony when he gets a cell signal and tries to call for help. Aunt Priscilla is killed to eliminate the only person who knows the full architecture of the plan. By the time Lois pieces it together and Diane has a gun pointed at her on the edge of the cliff. Quahog has lost several of its people, and then Diane is shot. From the mansion, from an upstairs window, a single shot. She falls. She does not come back. The mystery of who shot Diane is technically not a mystery because the show reveals it almost immediately. Stewie was on the roof with a sniper rifle. He delivers his reasoning with characteristic theatrical economy. If anyone is going to kill Lois, it's going to be him. This is treated partly as a dark joke and partly as a genuine callback to the original Stewie, the evil genius who spent his first 3 seasons plotting Lois's murder. He saved her not out of love, but out of proprietorship. She was his to destroy, and nobody else had the right. It's a fascinating moment, because it means that somewhere in the person Stewie had become, the softer and more emotionally available version, who had been building since season 4, the old Stewie was still there. Still watching. Still capable of picking up a rifle when the situation called for it. The act of saving Lois's life was, in its twisted interior logic, an act of possessiveness by the person who had always planned to take that life himself. That moment is never revisited. Stewie doesn't explain his reasoning further. Nobody asks him how he ended up on the roof with a sniper rifle at a dinner party. Nobody asks what it means that he chose to use it. The show drops the thread and moves on. It's one of the most interesting things that ever happened in the show. It's a brief and genuine resurrection of original Stewie, and it passed without examination. The episode confirmed that it was canon. The showrunners explicitly stated that the deaths in it were permanent. Diane Simmons would not come back. Muriel Goldman would not come back. Derek Wilcox would not come back. These were real deaths with real consequences in the world of the show. This was an unusually firm commitment for Family Guy, a show that had frequently treated death as provisional. And yet James Woods did come back. James Woods, who was definitively stabbed by Diane during the episode's power outage, appears in a later episode with the explanation that paramedics brought him to a secret lab for celebrities where he was revived. This is a throwaway joke explanation, but it's notable that it was provided at all. But the show felt the need to account for James Woods being alive while accepting the permanent deaths of the others. The asymmetry suggests something about which characters the show valued enough to keep in the world and which it was willing to lose. The deeper mystery of "and then there were fewer" is what it says about the people of Quahog. Nearly everyone in town had a genuine motive to kill James Woods. The episode documents this carefully. Woods had wronged each of them in specific, particular ways. The guest list is essentially a catalog of the damage this one person had done to this small community. And yet they all came when he invited them. They all came to a stranger's mansion in a thunderstorm on the word of a man they had reason to distrust and harm. Why? Because he promised to make amends. Because people want to believe that the people who hurt them are capable of change. Because the invitation said the event was in their honor, and who doesn't want to be honored? The psychological reality embedded in the episode's premise is quietly sharp. People accept invitations from their enemies because they want something to be different. And then they're stuck on a cliff in a storm, while someone more malevolent than any of them goes quietly to work. That's a real thing about human nature, and it's the kind of thing that the early Family Guy was genuinely good at observing, at wrapping a real observation in a ridiculous premise and letting it sit there for the audience to notice or not. The episode stands as evidence of what the show could do when it committed to something, when it took a premise seriously and followed it through. When it let the world of Quahog have genuine weight, genuine loss, genuine irreversibility. The deaths in it are real. The grief around them, brief as it is real. Muriel Goldman is gone, and Mort Goldman's life changes because of that. The show spent years establishing these people as part of the background fabric of Quahog, and then it removed some of them permanently, and the town was different afterward. That's a kind of storytelling that the show didn't pursue enough. And the fact that it exists in this one episode, this beautiful, strange, murder-soaked dinner party, makes it even more remarkable in the context of everything around it. The mystery of Stephanie's body is the one thing the episode itself admits it can't explain. Diane, confronted by Lois, goes through the evening's events in detail. She accounts for every death, every decision, every improvisation. And then Lois asks about Stephanie, the first victim, the one whose death was an accident. What happened to Stephanie's body? It disappeared during the chaos, and nobody knew where it went. Diane, for the only time in her confession, looks genuinely baffled. She doesn't know. She didn't take the body. Whatever happened to Stephanie is outside her plan, outside her accounting. It's the one detail that doesn't fit. A cutaway reveals the probable answer. It's dark, it involves Quagmire, and it's presented as a joke in the show's typically blunt way. But the fact that Diane herself didn't know is interesting. In her detailed, meticulous reconstruction of everything that happened that night, there is one blank. One thing she couldn't control and couldn't explain. One mystery within her mystery, which is, well, perhaps the most honest moment in the episode. Even the person who planned everything didn't know everything that happened. Even in a story that was designed to have all its answers, something slipped through the net. That feels true to Quahog, a place where even the explanations have gaps, where even the solved mysteries leave something behind. Section 13. The Mayor of Quahog, Adam West, and the Town. Nobody governed. For most of Family Guy's run, the mayor of Quahog was a man named Adam West. Not the real Adam West, the television actor best known for playing Batman in the 1960s television series, but an exaggerated cartoon version of Adam West who shared the real actor's name and who voiced his own character until Adam West's actual death in 2017. The real Adam West was reportedly delighted by the role, embraced its absurdism, and brought genuine warmth and commitment to what was, on paper, an extremely strange character to play. Mayor West is one of Quahog's most persistent mysteries for a very specific reason. He is the elected leader of the city. He holds the highest office in local government. He makes decisions, apparently, about the administration and governance of Quahog. And he is, by any observable measure, completely, extraordinarily unfit for this role. This is the joke, of course. Mayor West is eccentric to the point of being untethered from ordinary reality. He does things that are random and inexplicable. He makes decisions based on nothing comprehensible. He engages with the world on his own terms, which bear little relationship to the terms the rest of the world operates on. In various episodes, he has attempted to buy his own hat back from himself for increasingly large sums of imaginary money, believed he was transforming into a cat, and engaged in various other behaviors that would, in any functioning democracy, have resulted in his immediate removal from office. But he remains mayor. Nobody seems interested in removing him. Elections are referenced occasionally, but their outcomes are never taken seriously as a mechanism of accountability. Mayor West is simply there, in his office, making whatever decisions the episode requires him to make. And Quahog continues to function despite, or possibly because of, his leadership. The mystery isn't really about Mayor West himself. His inexplicability is the point of the character. The mystery is about Quahog's relationship with authority. The town has a mayor who cannot govern. It has a police force led by Joe Swanson that is effective in some episodes and completely absent in others. It has various institutions, a hospital where Dr. Hartman works with extraordinary incompetence, a news station that employs people who either murder others or passively watch murders happen, a school system that apparently fails Meg Griffin in quiet ways across the entire run of the show. Quahog's institutions are unreliable. Its governance is theatrical. Its public services work when the plot needs them to and break down when the plot needs that instead. This is standard animated comedy world building, but it creates an interesting question about what kind of town Quahog actually is. What does it take to maintain a community when the systems that are supposed to maintain it are this inconsistent? The answer, in Quahog's case, seems to be the people do it themselves, messily, through their personal relationships and their individual decisions, without much help from the structures that are supposed to organize civic life. The Griffins, for all their dysfunction, are in their way a kind of anchor. They stay. They persist. The town persists around them. Quahog keeps going not because of its mayor or its institutions, but because of something more informal and more resilient. Mayor West's death in the show, which occurred after Adam West passed away in real life and was handled with genuine tenderness, was one of the more moving moments in the show's later years. The episode that acknowledged his passing treated the character with real affection and allowed the world of Quahog to grieve genuinely. It was a reminder that the absurd and the sincere are not always opposites, that you can love something ridiculous without that love being ridiculous. Tom Tucker, the news anchor who appeared alongside Diane Simmons for many seasons and who outlived her by continuing as a main media presence in Quahog, is another minor mystery of civic life. His career has survived things that would end careers in any real newsroom. His personal behavior has been documented extensively and unfavorably over the years. His relationship to journalistic standards is, to put it mildly, flexible. And yet he remains the face of Quahog's news, apparently trusted by the community despite ample evidence that trust is misplaced. Quahog's media, its government, its healthcare, its education, its law enforcement are all simultaneously present and unreliable. They exist as set dressing as much as functional systems. The mystery of how this town keeps working despite all of this is perhaps just the mystery of how any community keeps working. People show up. They help each other, badly and inconsistently. The institutions fail and the people fill the gaps. The town persists not because its systems work, but because its residents don't have anywhere else to go. That's a kind of accidental philosophy for a show that never set out to have one. And it's one more unanswered question to carry with you as we move toward the end of our walk. Section 14. The Lore of Quahog. Buried Threads and Abandoned Worlds. There is a version of Family Guy's mythology that was being assembled brick by brick in the show's first 7 or 8 seasons that never quite got finished. The mythology wasn't formal or systematic. It wasn't a constructed universe in the way that some shows have constructed universes. But it was real, it was accumulating, and then at some point it stopped accumulating, and what had been built was left in place but not added to, and over time the incomplete architecture became harder to notice beneath the comedy happening on top of it. This section is about that incomplete mythology, about the pieces that were laid down and then left. The question of what Stewie's technology actually implies for the world has never been resolved. Stewie has invented, in the course of the show, a working time machine, a multiverse travel device, a shrink ray, a mind control helmet, various weapon systems, and numerous other technologies that would, in the real world, be of extraordinary scientific and strategic significance. He has invented things that governments would go to war over. He has invented things that would reshape what it means to be human. And this technology lives in a nursery on Spooner Street and is used primarily for personal adventures. The show has gestured, on a few occasions, toward the idea that Stewie's work has attracted outside attention. There are hints that government agencies are aware of him. There's a recurring implication that certain powerful entities have some knowledge of what Stewie has built. But these hints were never developed into a continuous narrative thread. They were deployed in individual episodes for specific comedic purposes and then set aside. The mythology of Stewie's technology, the world building that his inventions implied, remains one of the richest abandoned veins in the show's entire history. The talking animals of Family Guy are another unexamined piece of lore. Brian is a talking dog who is treated as unusual but not impossible. He exists in a world where talking animals are not standard, but where the general response to encountering one is mild surprise rather than profound shock. Other animals talk occasionally in the show for specific episodes, and are then returned to ordinary animal status. There seems to be no consistent rule about which animals in Quahog's world have the capacity for speech and which don't. As the show has occasionally suggested that there is something particular about the Griffin household that enables Brian's unusual nature, but this has never been explored. Is Brian the only dog in Quahog who can talk? Are there others? Is his capacity for human cognition a result of something in his breeding, something in his environment, something that happened to him in his early life? These questions have floated in the background of the show for over 2 decades without resolution. The afterlife is another piece of lore that was established and then left. Death appears as a character. Heaven and hell have been depicted in various episodes, with different visual interpretations and different rules and different appearances. God has appeared as a character, rendered inconsistently across different episodes. And the rules of the supernatural, in Quahog, never codified, include elements of Christian cosmology, secular comedy, and pure absurdism in proportions that vary by episode. What does it mean to die in Quahog? We've already discussed this partly, but the theological dimension of it is its own question. The show has shown that there is an afterlife. It has shown characters who have died encountering each other in that afterlife. It has shown that the dead can sometimes interact with the living. It has shown that certain forces, like death himself, operate as personal entities rather than abstract processes. All of this implies a complete supernatural cosmology for Quahog, a set of rules governing what happens after death, who goes where, what the afterlife looks like, what powers operate there. But that cosmology has never been articulated. That it's been gestured at in dozens of episodes without ever being assembled into anything coherent. The supernatural life of Quahog is real, but never explained. The show's relationship with time is the most fundamental piece of abandoned mythology. Quahog does not age consistently. The Griffin children have not grown up. The town has existed in a kind of loop for over 20 years of broadcast time. This could, in a show that was interested in its own mythology, have been explored as something genuinely strange about the town. An explanation, even a partial or comedic one, for why time moves differently in Quahog, why the rules of aging are suspended for certain people in certain ways, could have been one of the show's more interesting long-form threads. The show was never going to be that kind of show. But it wasn't structured for mythological continuity, but the materials were there. The curiosity was invited, and the questions that were raised were never answered, which means they remain hanging in the Quahog air, available to anyone who wants to spend a quiet evening with them. That's what we've been doing tonight, walking through the questions, not demanding answers, just acknowledging that they're there, that they matter in their way, that the town of Quahog is richer for the mysteries it contains than it would have been if everything had been explained. A fully explained world is a smaller world. A world with mystery in it is a world you can keep exploring. Quahog, for all its failures and abandonments and creative reversals, is still a world worth exploring. Still a place with fog coming in off the water, and lights on in the Drunken Clam, and a family in a brown house on Spooner Street who keep choosing each other, badly and imperfectly, episode after episode. That's enough. That, in the end, might be the answer to all the mysteries. Not a resolution, just a continuation. Section 15. The final mystery. What was Family Guy trying to be? And here, at the end of our walk through Quahog, is the biggest mystery of all, the one that encompasses everything we've discussed and holds it together. What was Family Guy trying to be? And what does it say about all these unanswered questions that the show ran for over 20 years and left so much unresolved? This is not a complaint, or at least not only a complaint. So there is something genuine and interesting about a show that raised so many questions and answered so few of them. The mysteries we've spent this night exploring are not primarily failures of writing, though some of them are that. They're also a record of ambition, of a show that kept reaching toward depth, toward complexity, toward meaning, and then pulling back, sometimes out of caution, sometimes out of time pressure, sometimes because a different creative direction took over, sometimes just because the joke was better than the resolution. The early seasons of Family Guy had a quality that is genuinely rare in animation. They had heart, real heart, of the kind that doesn't announce itself with swelling music or tearful monologues, but just lives quietly in the way the characters treat each other, in the small moments of recognition and affection that appear between the jokes. Peter telling Lois he loves her after a fight. Brian sitting up with Stewie during a bad night. The Griffin family, for all their dysfunction, choosing each other again at the end of every episode. Those moments, those quiet choices, are themselves a kind of mystery now. Because the show that exists in its later seasons contains fewer and fewer of them. The heart that was once the show's defining quality became harder to find, and the questions that were once interesting because they pointed towards something, toward depths not yet plumbed, became questions that pointed toward nothing but their own incompleteness. The greatest unsolved mystery of Family Guy might be the mystery of what the show was reaching for in those first few years. What did Seth MacFarlane see when he created this world? What did he think the Griffins could become? What story was he trying to tell about this town on the Rhode Island coast, these imperfect people in their brown house on Spooner Street, this family that loved each other despite everything? Those questions don't have clean answers either. But unlike the mystery of the giant chicken or the mystery of Stewie's transformation or the mystery of Quahog's geography, this one has a feeling attached to it. It's the feeling of something that was real and then became less real over time. Something that started with a vision and then gradually lost sight of it. That's the nature of long creative endeavors. They accumulate, they drift. They change in ways that nobody entirely planned. The show that exists now is not the show that began in 1999. And the distance between those two things contains more mystery than any single episode, any single character, any single unanswered question we've looked at tonight. But here's the thing about mysteries. They don't require resolution to have value. The questions we've asked tonight about Ernie the Giant Chicken and Brian's novel and Stewie's lost villainy and Meg's quiet endurance and Peter's transformation and Quagmire's age and the rules of death in Quahog and what the road to episodes mean for the show's canon, none of these needed to be answered to be worth asking. The asking is the thing. The sitting with the question, turning it over gently in the dark, feeling its texture without needing to break it open. Quahog is still there. The fog is still coming in off the water. Peter is still saying something ridiculous. Stewie is still at his high chair, and somewhere in the back of his mind, maybe, the architect of a dozen unfinished schemes is still drawing plans for something. Brian is still at his typewriter, still a few pages away from finishing the novel he's been writing since before most of the audience was born. Meg is still at the kitchen table doing her homework, waiting for something to change. They're all still there. The mysteries are still unsolved, and that's perfectly fine. Let them be unsolved. Let Quahog keep its fog and its unanswered questions in its characters, who keep coming back even when they shouldn't. Let the giant chicken keep living his life a few streets over, waiting for the next encounter that neither he nor Peter can explain. Some towns are better with their mysteries intact. Now, some shows are better for having tried and not quite finished, and some nights are better spent wandering through questions than arriving at answers. Good night, Quahog. Good night. If this walk through the mysteries of Family Guy kept you company tonight, please leave a like on the video. It helps more than you might expect. And if you're new to the channel, subscribing is free and it means the world to me. Uncle Guy lore is built around this kind of slow, careful look at the worlds we love and the questions they leave behind. There's a lot more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one. End of script word count. Approximately 22,000 words expanded closing. Additional reflection on what remains. There is a specific quality to the mysteries of a show like Family Guy that distinguishes them from the mysteries of, say, a prestige drama or a carefully constructed science fiction series. The mysteries of a prestige drama are usually intentional. They're placed with purpose. The writers know where they lead. The gaps are architectural, designed to draw the viewer forward, to maintain tension and interest across seasons until a planned revelation arrives. The mysteries of a carefully constructed universe are similar. Seeded, planned, resolved according to a blueprint. The mysteries of Family Guy are different. They are mostly accidental. They are the byproduct of a show that kept going longer than anyone planned, with a rotating cast of writers who each left their mark, with a creator who stepped back and then stepped further back, with a creative culture that prioritized the joke over the continuity, the episode over the arc, the moment over the meaning. That these accidental mysteries are, in their way, more honest than the intentional kind. They tell you something true about how creative work actually happens, about how worlds actually get built. Nobody sits down to write a television show and thinks, I will deliberately leave this question unanswered for 20 years as a strategic narrative choice. Usually the question gets left unanswered because there were other things to write, because the answer seemed less interesting than moving on, because the person who introduced the question had moved on by the time someone else needed to resolve it. The show that accumulates accidental mysteries over time is a show that was actually alive. It was actually changing, actually responding, actually finding its way as it went, rather than executing a predetermined plan. The gaps are evidence of life. Why an airless show with no gaps, no contradictions, no abandoned threads, is a show that was designed rather than grown. Family Guy was grown messily, inconsistently, sometimes irresponsibly, but genuinely grown. The world of Quahog has the density of something that was tended to over time, even if the tending was uneven. The characters have the depth of people who have been thought about by many different minds over many different years, even if those thoughts didn't always agree. The mysteries are real mysteries, not puzzles with answers waiting in a drawer. That's worth something. That's worth quite a lot, actually, on a night like this one, when the goal isn't answers, but company. When what you want is not a solution, but a presence. The presence of a world that has weight, and that has accumulated history and unresolved business and the texture of time. Quahog has that. Despite everything, despite the declining ratings and the creative drift and the characters who became something other than what they were meant to be, despite the unanswered questions and the abandoned threads and the jokes that went on too long, and the heart that got harder to find, Quahog has that texture. That weight, that sense of a place that existed and kept existing and kept being thought about by people who were trying, even when they weren't quite succeeding. You can feel it when you go back to the early episodes. The care that was put into the world. The specific quality of Quahog's New England light, the particular sound of Peter's laugh, like the way Brian moves through a room as if he has somewhere better to be, but can't quite bring himself to leave. These things were invented by someone who loved them. The love is still in there. And the mysteries, the beautiful, comfortable, unanswerable mysteries, are part of what love leaves behind when it builds something too big to fully explain. So, tonight, in whatever corner of the world you're reading this from, let the mysteries be with you. Let the fog come in. Let the questions drift. Let Quahog exist in its imperfect, unfinished, deeply compelling way, and let yourself rest in the world of a show that tried to be something, and sometimes was, and sometimes wasn't, and kept going anyway. That's enough. That's more than enough. Good night from Quahog. Supplemental. The peripheral mysteries of Quahog's supporting cast. We have spent most of tonight with the Griffin family and their immediate circle, but Quahog is a larger world than that. It has its own cast of peripheral figures whose mysteries, though smaller in scope than Peter's transformation or Stewie's lost evil, are real and worth sitting with on a night like this. Herbert the Old Man is one of them. He has been a recurring character for most of the show's run, appearing most often in scenes with Chris, and the nature of his presence in those scenes has never been examined directly by the show despite being one of its more persistent dark undercurrents. Herbert lives alone. He was once in the military, a fact revealed in a somewhat surprising episode that gave him a wartime history and a wartime friend who died. The episode treated Herbert's past with genuine sentiment, acknowledging that the man the show uses primarily as a source of uncomfortable comedy had a whole life before the audience met him. A life that included love and loss and the kind of loyalty that wartime produces. That Herbert has this history is one of the show's quietly interesting decisions. It doesn't resolve anything about him. It doesn't answer the questions his presence in Chris's life raises. But it complicates him in a way that prevents him from being simply a one-note figure. He is, underneath whatever the show uses him for, a person who served his country and lost his best friend and has been living alone ever since in a neighborhood where one family's son keeps showing up in his yard. The Goldman family deserves more attention than they typically receive. Mort Goldman, the pharmacist, is one of the show's most consistent background figures. He is neurotic, fearful, and deeply unlucky. His wife Muriel was one of the permanent casualties of the And Then There Were Fewer episode, a death that changed his life within the show's world, and that received at least some acknowledgement in subsequent episodes. The show gave Muriel's death weight, which is more than it does for many of the things it depicts. But Mort's grief was handled briefly, and then the character moved on, because the show doesn't have the infrastructure for sustained emotional aftermath. The Goldman family also includes Neil Goldman, Meg's long-suffering admirer, a character who represents one of the show's most interesting relationship dynamics and one of its most completely unresolved ones. And Neil has been in love with Meg since the earliest seasons. He is persistent, genuine, and completely unsuccessful. The show has never given their dynamic a resolution. Neil keeps trying. Meg keeps not being interested. The joke, such as it is in the perpetual imbalance. But underneath the joke is something that could have been a real character arc. A story about two people who almost fit together but don't quite, navigating a friendship-adjacent relationship across years of high school that stretches implausibly in the way that all of Quahog's timelines do. Tom Tucker's personal life is another minor mystery of Quahog's supporting cast. Tucker has had multiple relationships over the course of the show. He has a son, Jake, who appears in a few episodes, and whose dynamic with his father reflects some of Tucker's colder qualities. Thus, the relationship between Tom Tucker and his son is, in its way, another iteration of the show's recurring theme of imperfect fathers and their children. Tucker is not a warm man. His career has always come first. His son navigates around this in the way that children navigate around cold parents, finding workarounds, managing expectations. The show has never done much with this material. Tucker's fatherhood exists as a detail, a background feature rather than an ongoing thread. But it's there. And in a show as long as Family Guy, the things that are there but not examined are their own kind of testimony. Joyce Kinney, who replaced Diane Simmons as Tom Tucker's co-anchor after Diane's death and Then There Were Fewer, has her own history with the Griffin family that complicates her introduction. In an episode shortly after she joined the news team, it's revealed that Joyce and Lois have a past. They knew each other in college. Their shared history is darker and more complicated than the pleasant professional relationship Joyce presents to the public. The episode that explores this is one of the later show's better pieces of character work, using the reveal of a hidden shared past to say something true about how people present themselves versus who they actually were. Joyce continued as a background character after that episode, her history with Lois an established but rarely referenced fact. She became another element of Quahog's texture, another person in the town with a story that intersects the Griffins at unexpected angles. Seamus, the sailor with prosthetic arms and legs, is perhaps the purest example of a character who exists entirely as a visual joke, but who has accumulated enough appearances over the years to feel like a genuine member of the community. His disability is the joke. His cheerful presence in various dockside and maritime settings is the context. He has never been given an explanation or a history. He is simply there, one of Quahog's fixtures, as much a part of the landscape as the harbor itself. There is something genuinely endearing about Seamus. He shows up. He contributes his line or his moment. He persists. In a show where persistence is one of the defining qualities of the main cast, the background characters who keep returning have their own kind of persistence. They make Quahog feel lived in. They make the world feel wider than the Griffin household. The doctor, Elmer Hartman, whose name and face have been present in Quahog's medical life for most of the show's run, is perhaps the most dangerous supporting character in the series if you take the internal logic of his appearances seriously. Hartman has been shown to be spectacularly, often fatally incompetent. He has missed obvious diagnoses, made catastrophic treatment errors, and operated on patients with results that would, in the real world, have ended careers and triggered investigations. And yet, he remains Quahog's primary physician. His practice continues. His patients keep coming. The mystery of Dr. Hartman is partly a joke about the healthcare system, and partly a joke about how people keep trusting institutions, even when those institutions repeatedly fail them. But it's also another element of Quahog's logic. Thus, the town's institutions exist and persist regardless of their quality. Hartman keeps practicing medicine. Tucker keeps anchoring the news. Mayor West keeps governing. Nothing is held accountable in any lasting way. Quahog is a place that keeps going through and past its failures, with or without correction. That quality is, perhaps, its most human quality. We all live in worlds whose institutions are less reliable than they should be, whose authorities are less competent than we need them to be, whose systems fail at inconvenient moments and then continue as if the failure didn't happen. Quahog reflects this. Exaggerated, yes. Cartoonish, obviously, but not entirely unfamiliar. And in that familiarity, even in the show's most extreme moments, is the thing that made Family Guy resonate with its audience. It was a mirror held at an angle, and showing something true about the world it lived alongside. The image was distorted, deliberately and comedically distorted, but underneath the distortion was a real world, a real town, real people doing their imperfect best. That's what we've been looking at tonight. Not just the mysteries in isolation, but the world they belong to, the world that made them possible. Quahog, Rhode Island. Population, unknown. Time zone, elastic. Rules of mortality, negotiable. Giant anthropomorphic chickens, one confirmed, possibly more. It's a good town to spend a quiet night in, even if you can never quite map it, even if some of its questions never get answered. Maybe especially then. Shed a final word on sleep and mysteries. There is something that feels particularly right about exploring the mysteries of a long-running animated comedy in the small hours of the night. The shows we love best in the dark are not necessarily the ones we'd choose in the daylight. In the daylight, we want clarity, we want resolution. We want the satisfying arc and the earned conclusion, and the answer that makes all the questions retroactively worthwhile. At night, when the brain is moving toward rest rather than toward action, the unresolved question feels different. It doesn't press for an answer. It just exists, turning gently, a comfortable shape in the mind's quieter space. The Giant Chicken Fights, Brian's unfinished novel. Stewie on a rooftop with a rifle, choosing to save the person he once spent years trying to destroy. Meg doing her homework in a kitchen where nobody notices her. These images have a quality, a weight that is genuinely soothing when you're not trying to solve them. Family Guy, for all its noise and its chaos and its deliberately disruptive comedy, has a soft center that you can find if you look for it at the right hour. The early show especially. Those first 3 seasons, when the family still loved each other in ways the show was willing to show plainly. Without irony, without the defensive comedy that would later make warmth feel embarrassing. Those seasons have a lullaby quality if you approach them right. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a family, a strange and imperfect family, in a strange and imperfect town, doing their best, or at least trying to. The mysteries are part of that softness. They're the dreams that the show was having, running underneath the jokes, not fully conscious, not fully articulated. The question it kept almost asking about who these people really were and what they were really going through. The question it kept almost answering about what love looks like when it's expressed badly, when it's expressed by people who don't quite have the vocabulary for it. Peter Griffin, at his best, is a man who loves his family and can't quite say it. Brian Griffin, at his best, is a creature caught between what he is and what he wishes he were, and loyal to both. Stewie Griffin, at his best, is something extraordinary that the world keeps trying to make ordinary. Meg Griffin, at her best, is quiet strength that nobody has thought to look for. These are, underneath the comedy, genuinely human conditions. The show built a world around them, and then wasn't always sure what to do with what it had built. The mysteries are the evidence of that uncertainty, the questions that got asked and then set aside, waiting for an answer that never quite came. Let them wait a little longer. You don't need to answer them tonight. Tonight, just let Quahog be. Let the fog settle. Let the lights go out one by one across Spooner Street, across the whole improbable town until there's just the harbor and the darkness and the distant sound of the water. Let it all go soft. Rest now. The mysteries will keep.